A Dragon for Midwinter by Sarah Blackwell. No one knows why they come at Midwinter. Every child asks, and no parent ever really answers. All we know is that on our 10th midwinter, the longest night, we set out a basket. At some time during the night, a dragon will appear. No one ever sees it happen. Plenty of people have tried, but they fall asleep, or look away for a moment, or sneeze. Something always happens. Everyone has a dragon. They're not the big monsters of legend. They start out tiny, anywhere between the size of a rat to the size of a puppy, something a child can pick up. As adults, they're anywhere between 3 and 8 feet. They are unmistakably magical creatures. They don't eat much for their size, and they all have some power. Fire, or ice, or wind, or something. I was so excited that midwinter. I was the princess, after all. Surely my dragon would be special. Something exciting, like the sparkling white ice dragons, or the dark gleaming fire dragons, or the colorful crystalline light dragons. It took me a very long time to go to sleep, and when I woke up, I ran to the basket before the fire in my nightgown, but despite the cold. I was so disappointed, I could have cried. No pretty colors, no overt magic. It was an earth dragon. The commonest kind. Not even stone, but plain earth. It was curled up in the basket asleep, mottled in the dozen shades of dull brown. No horns, no wings, nothing. I would have sat right down and cried if it hadn't woken up and looked at me with big, soft brown eyes. I was still disappointed, but it was very sweet, and it was my dragon. By the time my nurse came in, I was feeding it and cooing over it, just like everyone does. I wasn't the only one who was disappointed. My father had a particularly large and fierce fire, my mother a lovely and delicate leaf, my older brother had ice, and he told me that my dragon was boring because I'm boring. He'd always been spiteful. I loved my dragon, who I named Umber for her color, but for a long time there was a little disappointment mixed into it. She was sweet and affectionate, but not exciting. It wasn't until I was older, in my teens, that I began to see more in her than others did. That she taught me the 3 lessons that made me what I am today. The first was observation. She was never large, a slender little creature like a long lizard, with clever feet and flexible body. She would ride on my shoulders, her hind paws on one shoulder, her front on the other, her long head and bright eyes always beside mine. And she looked everywhere, and I found myself doing the same, following her movements. And I saw things, important things, like a bribe passing between hands, or the flicker of an expression that hinted at a lie or a secret. Little things, too, like a bird's nest, red eyes that showed where tears had been, the first sign of coming rain. It took me time to realize that she was teaching me, that it wasn't just a part of growing up, and longer to realize that I was more observant than anyone else I knew. I couldn't think why people didn't notice things about what happened right in front of them. The second lesson Umber taught me was patience. She was more obvious about that one. When I got restless or didn't pay attention or made an impatient fuss, she would cluck in disapproval or bump my cheek to make me mind. Or, once or twice, even bite me on the ear. Like the lizard she resembled, she was patient as stone. She taught me to be still, to wait for the right moment, until I was so good at it that birds would come and sit on my shoulder while I sewed or read. And if I chose, I could be so still and quiet that people forgot I was even in the room. It was astonishing how much one could learn bent over an embroidery frame, seeming not to hear. The third I had never been able to sum up in one word, and I cannot explain how she taught it, though it was very distinct to me. Contemplation and logic are both parts of it, as well as intuition and examination. Perhaps the closest word is understanding. I learned that because I had an earth dragon, like so many other people, I seemed more approachable. Down to earth, people say, meaning sensible or practical. And I discovered that an earth dragon, well loved and tended, is like a secret signal of sense. Wherever I went, I found myself welcomed. If I stopped to chat with a peasant, or a shopkeeper, or even a beggar, they would answer. When I sought out the steward, or the cooks in the kitchen, or the master gardener, they answered my questions, seeming to think it very good sense, very sound good sense that I learned all about their business of keeping a castle. After all, as a princess, I would likely be a queen one day. I made friends, not only of the ladies of court, but of my ladies in waiting and my tutors. I learned to be kind and considerate and practical. I learned how to manage a castle, how to do business, even something about farming and the management of the lands. And all the things I learned from all these people, I turned over in my mind and put together with the pieces of a puzzle. I was 16 when I realized that my father wasn't a very good king. I believe he meant to be, but he was bored by dull things like discussing the crops or maintaining roads, or the state of the treasury. Too much was left in the hands of others, and too often he dismissed as unimportant things that were anything but. My mother, dearly though I loved her, had been taught all her life to be pretty and silly and sweet, and was very good at that and nothing else. And my brother was going to be a terrible king. Selfish, spoiled, and unkind, as the fairy tale says of the bad prince. He didn't even have my father's redeeming quality of being an excellent soldier. Though he loved to fight, he lacked the patience and self-discipline he needed. When I was 18, a war began, supposedly because the other kingdom had encroached on our borders, but I had never really believed it. My father and brother liked fighting too well, and sure enough, within months, they were both gone, protecting their kingdom, they claimed, with blade and bow and the blood of the common men they did not value. Their kingdom. Who did they think governed it when they were gone? My dear, silly mother, who cried when confronted with a difficult choice? It wasn't a year before I was ruling the country in all but name. I had spent years teaching my people to respect my sense and judgment. With Umber on my shoulder, I consulted with tax collectors and governors governors of provinces, merchants' guilds, and the noblewomen left behind to manage the estates for husbands and fathers and sons. They came to me with dragons beside them, or on their shoulders, or fluttering around their heads, and saw a princess with an earth anchoring her and trusted me. Those who saw only a girl and a dull dragon who tried to intimidate or trick me soon learned better. Earth is strong and solid and not easily frightened. I was not particularly grieved when words came that my brother had been killed in combat and my father wounded. Of course I did everything I should. I arranged the 20 days of mourning appropriate for the death of a crowned prince. I summoned the finest doctors with the dragons of earth and vapor and root, and prepared for my father's return. When his fever broke and he was himself again, he and my mother bewailed the fate of the kingdom. They had no other sons. What would become of their kingdom without a king? It was the seneschal, summoned to my father's chambers, who first raised the obvious point. "My king," he said gravely, when my father had finished rambling in the tournaments and quests to find a suitable heir, or about tournaments and quests to find a suitable heir. "You already have an heir, the princess." My father laughed at that. "The princess? How could a maiden, one unmarried and excuse me. That just came out of nowhere. My father laughed at that. "The princess? How could a maiden, one unmarried at more than 20 years of age, rule a kingdom? Rule my kingdom?" To my surprise, my mother didn't agree with him. "She's very capable," she said slowly. "Indeed, my dear, ever since poor Duke Corral fell ill after you left, she's been managing things very well." He snorted. Oh, she manages the castle well enough, I dare say. An old maid must be of some use. But that is not the same as ruling a kingdom. I did not think he remembered I was in the room. In all the time he ranted about the incompetence of women until he tired himself and went to sleep. His dragon, however, watched me uneasily. When he was asleep, we left the room, and it was my mother who turned to me first. "I'm sorry, my dear," she said, clasping my hand. "I will try to make him understand. You do so much more than run the castle. I do know it, even if I'm not much help to you." I kiss her cheek, Umber and her dragon lily nuzzling each other for a moment. "You do help, Mother. Understanding has taught me that false compliments are empty things, and how to pay truthful ones, even if they require a little exaggeration. You've been such a comfort to me through all of it. I'm sure I wouldn't have managed nearly as well if you hadn't been here to encourage me and praise my efforts." She brightens at that, and it is true that she is a comfort, even if it isn't one I really need. "Well, I try, my dear." She turns to the seneschal. "I will try to make him understand," she promises. "But he's going to want to find a suitable man to marry me," I say, not quite keeping the sour edge out of my voice. "And not one who's a capable administrator or a good ruler, but one who's like him." The seneschal meets my eyes, and I am startled by the sudden fierceness in his gaze. "That," he says grimly, "I understand very well." I can truly say that I do not know how it happened, or when. All anyone knows, is that sometime during that night my father took a turn for the worse. Infections, say the finest doctors, and shook their heads. Spleen, said the priests and priestesses, and sighed sadly. Grief for his son, said my mother and the palace ladies, dabbing at their eyes. In 2 days, he was gone. By the time the news reached his male relatives, the cousins and second cousins in other kingdoms, I had been crowned queen. By the time they reached us to protest and demanded the throne, I was already negotiating peace with our neighbors. I do not know who decided to put an end to my father. I hope I never know. That it was someone within the castle, I'm fairly certain. For only they had heard the rumors of his desire to replace me, queen in all but name for 3 years, with yet another man like him, and like my brother, who would strip the treasury to pay for wars and let the roads decay and the poor starve. Someone in the castle decided to do what they thought best for the kingdom. I had been queen now for 5 years. The kingdom prospers, and so do the people. Not long ago, I traveled to the coast to meet the envoys from an island kingdom considering trade with us. They sent one of their own princesses, having heard of me, and she and I got along very well, her sea dragon playing with Umber while we talked. On my way back, we passed a farm, and I turned aside from the column and rode to the farmhouse. When I reached it, a middle-aged man came out to meet me. He looked deferential, but I was pleased to note, not frightened. My people know I like to stop and chat. "Your Majesty," he says, bowing politely, "what can we do for you this fine day?" I smiled at him. "I just wanted to ask how your farm goes." I dismounted from my horse and looked out over the fields, soft and green with spring growth, and all the farms around here. I don't often come this way, and I haven't heard any news in a while. Not since the soil going sour 2 years ago. That's all gone now, I hope? "Yes, Your Majesty. There's no sign of it this year." He looks pleased that I remember. "When we sent to the capital, 2 men came back with our messengers, and they showed us as it wasn't the soil at all, but a sickness that had come on the wheat after a wet summer, which we'd had and no mistake. They said it happens sometimes when where they come from, further east, and showed us what to do to fix it. And the crops last year were as good as ever." That's good. The field certainly looked healthy enough. I'm glad you got help so quickly. Oh, we knew we would, he said, matter-of-factly, not as if trying to please me. I will say, Majesty, and meaning no offense, I'm glad it happened 2 years ago and not 10. Not a word against the old king, of course, but he wasn't a man for the land. The slender earth dragon on his shoulder lifts his head, and it exchanges a long look with Umber. Soldiers are poor farmers, they say, and it's true enough to my mind. He looks at Umber too, and then at me. He might not have understood as to what the problem was, or why the taxes was late. But we knew your Majesty would understand, being of the nature of earth, as we say. Yes, I understood. I stroke Umber absently and smile at him. I'm glad all is well now. I think that the dragons we receive are the ones we need, even if we don't know why when we're young. Without Umber, without the confidence she gives the ordinary people in me, without the things she taught me, I would not be a queen now. Not a queen regnant, at least. Only the means by which another man becomes king.